Welcome, everyone. My name's Judd Hendrix, and I want to welcome you to Interfaith Paths to Peace Soul-Centric City program. This is a special event that we've created with Japa Buckner called Cultivating the Soulful Image of Your Child. And I'm glad you've joined us today. This program will be recorded if you want to share it afterwards. It's actually a 3-week series where we're going to be looking at how to create loving observation of our children for child care providers, teachers, but also for parents, and how we can cultivate a soulful image of our child and use that as a guiding principle to help them nurture and become the unique souls that they are in the world. We'll talk more about that, but welcome. I'm glad you all could join us today. And Japa Buckner is going to be leading us through this. And I'll introduce Japa briefly and then let him introduce himself more to you. This is part of a series called Cultivating a Soul-Centric City, where we're taking different life stages and asking the question, what resources do we have in Louisville, Kentucky to create a holistic, soul-centric path of development from cradle to grave? And we're currently looking at 11 to 14, 6 to 11-year-olds. And next month, we're going to be looking at the teenage years. But this idea of cultivating a soulful image of your child is a practice that you can continue throughout your child's life. I've got 3 college-age students, or one that's out of college and 2 that are in college, and I'm still trying to discern their soulful image. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to nurture them as young adults that's different than the way I did when they were teenagers or children. And so this is a lifelong practice of parenting and caregiving. I've also heard Japa's talk about this, and have found myself trying to practice it also with other children or people that I run into, how to lovingly observe them and invite them to be all that they can be. So I'm glad you decided to join us. Japa has a rich history in Waldorf education. He's also been a personal caregiver for children, and also taught in different schools. And so we're really delighted to have kind of 3 weeks with his wisdom. So Japa, welcome. Tell us a little bit more about what we're going to be doing, and thank you so much for who you are and the wisdom that you're bringing to our community. Thank you, Japa.
Thank you, Judd, and I'm glad to be a part of this process of helping people in Louisville develop these resources so we can meet developing human beings in a way that nurtures their capacity to make a difference in our lives and the world. Now, and actually, I do have a little slideshow, which I'm pretty much going to go through a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and share that screen. And I think I've done a lot of work on this, and I actually use this with children that I work with in terms of having teachers use a couple of forms I use. And so it'll be very easy to show some examples of how you can work through this process. Today, in particular, we're going to be working on the loving and careful observation of the child. And then we'll be working on how do you develop imagery, because imagery can keep your observations whole and reveal things that without this sort of reductionist approach that sometimes people move to after we observe. We have these benchmarks and things like that that reduce our picture of the child and give us less access to understanding their successes and struggles. So, and after imagery, we're going to talk a little bit about what kind of analytic tools we can use to look at what we have sort of found out to bring us more complete relationship with our children. So I'm going to share the screen right now.
And Japa, let me...
Host disabled. You have to go back and do that, Judd.
Oh yeah, I need to make you, thanks Japa, make you a co-host. I also want to say, as you're pulling up that screen, Japa, One of the reasons why this is really important, and Japa and I were talking about this before we started the call. One of the things we know from systems dynamics is Carl Jung says that the greatest burden children bear is the unactualized life of the parent. And so, as we think about cultivating loving observation of our children and help in order to help this soulful image emerge, I also really want to encourage parents to be very attentive about cultivating their own soulful image, because what we've learned in family systems dynamics is that the unlived life of the parent becomes a burden for the child. So the first work we need to do is cultivating our own soul, cultivating our own unique role in the world. And then that frees children to live their own lives. Family systems often talks about that families, that love and belonging doesn't flow in families, often because a child is living the unconscious life of the parent. And this soulful image idea allows us to not project our unactualized lives onto the child, and helps protect our children from conventional ways in which they think they ought to be. Um, a soul-centric city would be a city that allows everyone to know and feel beloved in their unique role in our city. And so I'll
Are
just
you all seeing my screen, Judd, or not?
yes, I see you. I see the screen. That's my email though. I'm
You don't
seeing
see the soul picturing screen, do you?
no, we see my email.
Yeah, for some reason it didn't come up properly. Oh, it's going to be one of those days, Judd. Oh, there it
That's
is.
all right. The technology gods are working against us.
You
There we
have it
go.
now?
We got it now. That's perfect.
Let me make sure I didn't, I got to go out again because I didn't make sure I optimized for video.
Sure. So anyway, just in that's kind of my brief introductory word to really encourage parents to do their own soul imaging so that we can free our children to live their unique images as well.
Let me ask you a question now. You see the soul picturing screen.
Yes.
Now, do you see the switch now?
Yes, we see that a new screen there.
Okay, great. Okay, we're set.
Great. Take it away.
Thank you for your patience,
Oh,
everybody.
all good.
Okay, so this is just my little introduction, kind of what Judd has said already. It's my hope that Soul Picturing might enrich the striving of parents, companions, and teachers to understand the struggles and successes of children toward our more joyful and fruitful nurturance of them. To realize this hope, I want to encourage and provide resources for individuals and groups of nurturers already formed that may form to explore and employ soul picturing. So what we're going to do over the next 3 weeks is learn how to do loving and careful observation of the child, how to cultivate the feeling perception. Means when we observe children, we will have a feeling in response to those observations, and how to cultivate that and develop that to lead to what we call active imaging of the child. And then in the third week, we will have the analysis of the imaging for any revealed significances. The goal of this is the recognition of and relationship with the child as independent and unique individual. So the loving, careful observation of the child is the first step of soul picturing. The details of the child's features, proportions, movement, speech, and interests are lovingly and carefully observed and articulated. Now, I'm going to make sure that everybody has a link to this slideshow so that you can go. I'm not going to show all these videos, but this is a video of a 2-year-old that you can practice this process of observation on, or of course you can practice with your own child. Just to give a little bit of a thing. When you can see that when you're observing children, there's richness of movement, There's richness in just the physical features, and there's also this richness of to be observed and to come to understand that a child's presence is not an accident of heredity. A child's presence reflects the activity of spirit at creating a person prepared to fulfill a destiny. And so this is the loving approach we want to bring to the children by recognizing that the children, are unique individuals and we can see in their presence how they are preparing to fulfill a destiny. Another aspect of this observation is the careful approach. Beyond the features identifying a child's gender, ethnicity, or race, seek in your descriptions nuance that reveals individuality. Such individuality will stimulate revealing imagery. And so it's really important that when we do descriptions of children in these observations, that we are not simply saying things that include them in a given demographic, such as their gender, their ethnicity, or their race. That we learn how to make observations that actually reveal the individuality of the given child. So what I want to do right now, if everybody is sort of keeping up with me, is go through a little bit of this video here of these two young girls and show some examples of how you would observe them in a way that looked more at just what would include them in certain demographics, but what would also reveal their uniqueness. Before I go on, I just want to stop and see if there's any feedback or questions so far. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of go ahead here. Is everyone, Judd, can you all see and hear the video? Judd. Judd.
Yeah, yes, we see it and hear it.
Okay. I wanted to make sure I wasn't just talking to myself here.
No, we got you. Everything looks good.
Okay. So So we can look at these two young girls right now. And one of the first things that we look at when we're making observations are we look at the face, and we look at the physical features associated with the face. And I'm going to go now to a little form and that talks about particular aspects of the child's face, the head itself, the ears, the eyes, the nose, and talk a little bit about how you would want to look at these features and what you would want to be, the nuances you would look for to make sure that you're capturing the presence of the individuality of the child and not just their demographic inclusion. So take a little look at those faces. We don't need to remember right now the faces, because I'm just trying to give you examples of what you would articulate from looking at such faces. So I'm gonna go to this form over here. Is the form up now?
Yes, the form is up.
Okay. So actually, I have four descriptions here. Now, two of these descriptions are of the little girl who's building with the blocks, and two of them are descriptions of other children that have been done by Waldorf teachers, children that I'm working with at the moment. Now, you can see, I hope everybody can see, like under head, we have this one response which says that the head is large and round. And then we have another response that says the head is round oval, not narrow oval. Now, both of these, the head is one of the things that's easy in observation to find some quality of uniqueness or individuality. That's not so demographically identifying if you stay away from just talking about the color of the skin or anything. But even more, this third description, this teacher has had more experience with the child and says the head is small, delicate, small features, forehead appears larger. So here we're getting a little bit more nuance in terms of how individual this child's head is, which is going to be able to help us more when we work to have a feeling response to that and lift it into imagery. And here again, we have head is oval shaped, but not narrow. And also look at this particular description. Forehead is forward of brow. Now, one of the real difficult ones to find nuance with is the hair. And this particular child is brown, slightly wavy, cut short. Now, this is a pretty good description in terms of an individual sense of how the child's hair may be a revealing presence. In this second one here, we have the term thick. So thick and thinness of the hair. Whether the hair is dark brown or straight in particular won't give us much information about the uniqueness of the child. The length of the hair, as we see in this last one, is also one that can be very important to point out. Again, I'm gonna look at eyes now. And these four descriptions, usually almost everybody's eyes are almond shaped. And so even though that's a good description, it doesn't bring in much uniqueness. But that can be qualified a little bit. Eyes are almond shaped and a little narrow. The color of the eyes, unless they're unique, in this case, they're gray, is also doesn't generally identify much in terms of out of the demographic that the child may belong to. But this last one, the person has pointed out that the lashes are long. The eyes are blue, but there are long lashes. So this gives a little bit more of a picture of how the eyes may present to the world a little bit more of the child's individuality. Let me stop again because I don't want to just go on talking too much. Are there any responses to how I am talking about these features being indications of the individuality of the child and how to utilize that?
I do. So as we think about this, is it kind of what you just said of how the child presents to the world, thinking about what, yeah, just how they show up? Are those the qualities that we're looking for?
Yes, and we want to make sure that we're not just giving descriptions that identify them, as I said, but in terms of their ethnicity or their race or their gender, but things that seem about these features that are more unique. As another one, I haven't done the nose yet, but can everybody see the video again?
Yes.
So if you look at these two girls, look at the bridges of the nose. Very different. This bridge is undefined, but this bridge is more well-defined. Now, in a lot of ways, I could do a description of these noses that might not capture that, which is more of a way in which these children are unique. Obviously, their heads are also, this child's more narrow, this child's more rounded. And so you want to make sure that when you're doing observations of the child, you're capturing those nuances because those are going to impact your ability to perceive on a feeling level, at least, the individuality of the child.
Japa, I want to bring in here when you mentioned eyes. There is this comes out of the what's called the Michael teachings, but there's an idea that um, when a child gets older, and I think you'll help us distinguish when we move to making uh, archetypical types of connections with children, like having the archetypical roles of, sage or priest or, those kinds of archetypical images.
Right.
They, one of the ideas there is that you can see that in a child's eyes, that if you actually get a really good image of the child's eyes, that their archetypical, and I think it's more maybe for adults or teenagers, but when you look at them, you can see these archetypical um, images of shine through their eyes. And so I think this looking at into the eyes and at the eyes of children or young adults can help us get a sense of their archetypical maybe the archetypical patterns that are moving through them. So
Yes, and so I'm gonna switch. There's more in terms of the physical um, presence of the child's face. Like the ears are very important also, whether they're lobed or not lobed. But I'm gonna one thing that's connected with this idea of the eyes in the young child is the child's movement, because in a way there's a real connection. You can see in the children's eyes um, uh, how they are engaging the world, and that then translates is how the children move in the world. So I'm gonna go over here and show you the movement of this one little girl. I'm gonna talk, and I'm gonna go look at some of the descriptions of movement. Everybody got the moving screen now?
yes.
Can you watch her?
Finish over there, Candace.
I'm gonna switch to what was said about movement here. Now, when you look at movement, does everybody have my form again?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we got the form. Uh-huh.
When you look at movement, now I'm gonna go to overall movement, but usually movement, we looked at it, we say thinking, feeling, and willing, how what's manifesting for the movement and the thinking. But I'm gonna go back to that after we look at some of these overall descriptions of movement. And so in this case, this person is saying that the movement is deliberate, smooth, and appears impulse from the upper chest. This is a real important element for young children, is where the movement is impulse from. Like, and one of the more unique elements of looking at a child. Children can impulse, if you watch them, they can impulse from the lower body, like their legs can kind of carry them forward. I have a child that I'm observing now who's very much impulse. You can see their chin jut forward every time they move. And a lot of people move impulse from the upper chest. And so you can see a lot of uniqueness and individuality in that. But you can also, let me see, this is a different child, but this person says the movement is fluid, darting, distracted, inconsistent. And you can see a very big distinction between these two descriptions. So movement, later on, what I'm gonna suggest to you is that initially we're very visceral people, visceral beings. So what later on comes into the eyes, you can really see in the movement in a young child, how they move. But as you develop, more of that begins to be present in the way we actually impulse our movement and look at the world. Early on, we get the impulses from the body, so it isn't so much being impulsed from the eyes. But you could still see to a great degree that that particular little girl had quite a bit of visual impulsing already. But for some children, the visual impulsing is a lot less, and they're impulsed more from their limbs and their bodies. And so this is a very important area to look at. Movement, another description, movement is light and unlabored. I'm gonna go back to the distinctions. The thinking quality of movement. And so in this case, I think this was a description for this little girl also. No, this is a different child. So the thinking description says that the child's movement is focused. Uses her hands to do small things with clay. Deliberate and careful is another description of movement that seems to involve more of the head forces. And you can ask yourself, when you see the children will have different, will bring different forces, their head forces, their heart forces, or their limb forces to their movement. Focused yet chaotic, which is that's when you get those kind of descriptions, it tells you that there's really a little bit of enigma for the child. And you take that inward and try to feel what that means. And so the movement, early on, the movement, I would say, is the window to the soul. I'm gonna stop there. Is there any more in the responses to what I've said about how movement early on is more of the window for the soul as opposed to the eyes?
I have one question. When we're when we're looking at our children, we can just see one child. In a classroom setting, you can see many children and a kind of range of kids. Do you have any suggestions on, I don't know, how to see your own kid like in isolation, just themselves?
Yeah, well, actually, this form that I'm going through is pretty detailed. Like I said, it touches on, there's 4 elements of the child's presence that you looked at. The physical presence, we call the vital, the movement, the life presence, which also includes movement and speech. We'll look at speech also. And then there's the interest of the child in the world, how they express their interest in the child. Now, later on, intention can also be seen. So you have vitality, interest, and physicality as being 3 things you observe. Now, when you observe a child, when you're actually living with them and being present with them day after day, in a way, this enriches those 3 elements of presence in your observation of them. And if you also are bringing this loving and careful approach, meaning that you are expecting to find this unique expression of how the child is preparing for their own destiny, as well as looking for the nuances that show how the child is individual. It won't be necessary to do comparisons, really. And in a way, comparing, I think, in a way, is not necessarily where you want to go.
Hmm.
You want to really deepen the observation of your child in these 3 areas, and really try to be careful in terms of looking for how, like I said, if you look at the nose, kind of notice things if the nose, how much forward it is, whether it's flat, whether it has a defined bridge, different elements, whether it has freckles on it. There are different elements that over in the richness of your relationship with the child, that if you're practicing this loving and careful approach, you will find that there's plenty of indications of the child's individuality.
Thank you, Japa. That's helpful.
Japa, can
Could I
you?
ask a question?
Oh, go ahead, Tanya. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I don't know if this is relatable, but this is the position that I find myself most of the time. So whenever I look at someone, especially children, because of their innocent, self of existence, their energy is the only thing that I can see, I would say, from the standpoint of them being a being, right? And so it is impossible for me to, like, I find it difficult to define a child by physical description of movement. And it's almost like the energy is the only thing that I see and then therefore perceive, and then I can engage with it and I know how to engage with it. So does it, and I don't know if that's because that's just my form of operation in this world, but does this form or does this observation address the energetic signature of a being, or are we solely looking at it from physical movement and I guess the five senses standpoint?
No, actually, you're very right. And actually, I am very similar. When I first observe a child, almost anyone, I experience them energetically initially, and in a way, because I'm what they call a Saturn personnel, I'm always going from the whole to the parts. So I have to usually do a little work to find the corresponding more material expressions of what I'm initially experiencing. And as you see, I just talked about the thinking element, but another element of observing the movement of children is the feeling aspect of the movement, which I can go to some of those descriptions. And those will capture more of what you, for instance, this little girl has a quality in her movement of anticipating or expectancy, in a feeling level. And so there's different ways that those in the feeling realm where those energetic descriptions actually are more present. I do think there's some value in terms of this idea of this careful approach, because even for myself, of then working with that to see. It's like starting with a cloud or this energetic thing and seeing if I can find the sources of that energy or how that energy is impacting the physical presence of the child. This is what you're saying, is that the child's presence on every level, physical and energetically, we can find connections. And if we're careful and if we're respecting the child's independence and individuality, then it will kind of arise for us. But I don't think there's any problem with the ideal that you really picking up on the child initially energetically. You would have, as we talk about imaging, you may ask yourself, does that imaging emerge easily out of the energetic perception, or could you find some benefit from trying to see how that energy is impacting the child's presence on a more physical level?
Yeah, and I usually, the way I usually see it, I guess just because I'm not around the kids too much, but I used to be around the kids a lot, is I see their expression of their physical action usually leads to a complete facilitation from their energetic form. So like, them being engaged in building the blocks in the very specific, unique way that they are, right? One is choosing these small
Right.
container, colorful, balancing things out, versus the other one, creating this tower that is,
Exactly.
the goal is to go beyond her reach, right? You can already see the energetic signatures of where they're going.
Right.
And so, yeah, to me, yeah, their physical form. And of course, in this case, what's more interesting, I think, which is, I think, where we're missing out on, then if they were to act out, if they were to misbehave under the guidance of whatever misbehaving looks like, is instead of looking at it from the physical standpoint and going, oh, this child is acting bad because, they're doing this. All of that could be traced back to some sort of energetic signature, which I think is what we're missing right now. Sorry, I'm getting off topic, but
I agree with you completely. And actually, the thing what we're trying to do is give people, like, you and I and others have you. It seems like it'd be automatic that for you that people could see that energetic um, um, presence and be able to recognize that this child is living in that in their being, and that's what's unfolding. And we need to respect and nurture that and understand what it needs. But it's not the case. A lot of people don't really perceive that. And this whole child study process is a way, okay, what can you observe? Let's start with what you can observe that's more concrete. And I'm going to teach you how to see the impact of the energetic being on that and unfold it through the process of imaging. So this really is a way of supporting individuals who really don't feel that energetic presence. But I agree with what you're saying 100%. That's where we really want to get to. And that's what this process is about. So let me
Japa,
see.
can
Go
I
ahead.
also jump in? One of the things I've really appreciated about Rudolf Steiner is we usually talk about the 5 senses, but he has a 12 sense model where,
Exactly.
and I put a link into the chat box about looking at, when we say senses, he includes the normal senses that we would have, but he also has things like concept, language, hearing, warmth, vision, balance, taste, smell. So he broadens what we mean by senses. And I think that, Tanya, what you're talking about is also the difference between our intuition and our sensing function. There is the sensing function, and then there's the intuition that somehow takes all of those and wraps them into a larger picture. And what I appreciate that you're doing, Japa, is whether we have an inclination towards the large picture, the intuition, or the sensing picture, the particulars, that doing a loving observation would include all of those, that we would
Right.
integrate our thinking and our feeling in our observation of children.
And so allow people to come to an unfolding of some soul picture of the child out of maybe where, it's like we always talk about, we got to start with where children are. We got to start with where adults are too. And many adults, don't necessarily have that capacity. They will do exactly this first part. They'll say, well, here's what I observed. And then you say, oh, you know what? You can take those observations and you can get a sense of deeper things going on in the presence of the child. Especially if you start with this loving approach and assuming the child is individual and has brought something into the world, other than what the body is presenting. If you make that assumption and then you start looking at these details, you might ask yourself, how is that manifesting in the physical presence of the child, as well as the other ways we can perceive the child energetically? I took and changed to the point where the child is speaking, because speech with movement is also one of those big things that can indicate the energetic quality that your child brings. I'm going to play that briefly.
He's stacking all the bricks up.
Stacked up.
It won't fall down.
Back there with the paint. Thank you.
It's not falling.
I know.
Even more.
It must be a tower, is it?
How about look at mine?
Oh, what that one?
I made that.
That is a very tall
house. Mine is a castle.
Yours is a castle? Oh, cool. Nice castle.
I don't know if
I think when you do that, it's going to go. It's going down. It's going down.
Japa, you can't stop it there. I want to know if that thing falls or not.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So this speech quality is and being able to describe it for young children. Like in that case, particular, you heard her speech, and now some descriptions. I'm gonna go to this next one. This is not the child in the video, but here's how this one teacher talks about the child: loud, expressive, normal pitch, pronunciation of some letters are not clear. And this is actually for that particular child: slightly higher pitch, breathy, childlike voice. Sometimes you can get a child, you can say that I've seen people talk about a child's voice being wet and breathy. and dry and are expressive, are held back. And so again, even though I am describing something in a sensorial way, it's really this energetic quality, this nuanced energetic quality that I'm trying to capture, not really trying to necessarily get any demographic information, but I'm really, exactly like Tanya said, I'm trying to capture how this energetic quality is manifesting in the child's voice. Any responses?
Japa, do you have you're pulling from some sheet here? Is there a blank form here?
Yes, there is. Actually, this is a form which I create, which the teachers I work with fill this out ahead of time. Well, not ahead of time, actually. And then I go observe the child like I'm observing 2 children now. And then this form is available. And actually, it's actually linked to, let me go back to the slideshow. There it is, observation form. If you click on that, you actually will get the form.
Can you send us a link to the presentation and to that form?
Yes, I will.
Great.
Because I actually do want people to either use this form to observe a child in their life or the first child in the video in preparation for doing the image work next week. So I do want people to have the availability of this.
Can I ask you a question? So since you're in education, do you find that, I almost, this is like a wishful thinking, right? But if all teachers can see past the physical and they can see past the verbal cues and actually can see the soul of a child, right? And then be able to address that or even interpret that child's interaction with the class and then also with themselves as an expression, of their true being, that is my ideal situation. But do you find that the current educational system is there, or is there a lot of teachers who are aware of this, but, are not speaking up maybe? Or are we just completely blind in this?
No, actually, now, of course, this comes out of the child study approach, which is done in all Waldorf schools.
Okay.
All Waldorf schools use this child study approach. They actually do almost exactly what I'm presenting here over the next few weeks. So it gets a little bit more esoteric in some Waldorf settings. It maybe seem pretty esoteric even to you all when we get to the imaging stuff, but in reality, I've tried to make it more concrete. But also, one thing that's even more mainstream right now is this practice of really learning to observe children. Because the thing is that teachers haven't really been in the past, at least in the early childhood programs I know, encouraged to really sit down and do careful, loving observations of the children. Even that act itself has its own benefit in terms of how you relate, how you're in relationship with the child, your capacity to recognize the child on some level better, and your capacity to be in relationship. And this is becoming a part of the early childhood expectations for teachers. Now, the problem with all of this is you do have this reduction when you start getting into more mainstream professional areas of child observation. It's what comes next that's the problem, because what happens is that for in what they call so-called evidence-based approaches, you come up with these set of benchmarks or criteria to tell you what your observations mean, which actually begins to put the child in a box to undo the work you've just done, in terms of really building your relationship with the child. And so what we need to hopefully happens in the future is that people begin to say, well, there's another source of being informed about the child other than these more reductionist benchmark criteria kind of things that we use the observations to inform. We can use imagery. We can use our intuition. We can use our feeling perception to keep the observations whole, so that we don't end up in essentially negating who the child is after we have done this careful observation. Do people follow where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah, and I really appreciate the question, Tanya. I also, again, a lot of adults haven't cultivated their capacities to sense all of the things that we're talking about. And so I think that's another, how do we help cultivate teachers or caregivers or even our own capacity to tap into presence all of these different things that we're inviting them to see. And I think that's a capacity of, do teachers know how to do that kind of observation? Are they aware of their own capacities, both to sense the physical and the intuitive or the spiritual? And I think that takes some development as well for teachers.
Well, mine is just turned 8, and she is in 2nd grade, right? And so I will share the story, and this is why I'm on this call, is because I went into it was called like coffee and meat or whatever it was, but they had a counselor at school that was there to address with parents who would want to attend issues or things of how you would deal with childs who were angry or acting out or things like that, right? Or how to better parent under those circumstances, right? And I went into this thing, and all the questions were normal. Everything flowed perfectly normal in it. And then the question then I raised is, what if the child is acting out because they are spiritually aware and they are intuitive, like they're an empath, and the acting out is not due to their energy, they're reading someone else's energy. And then that to me, that happens all the time. I have to know how to control someone else's energy coming into my space before I'm able to discern what is mine and what is someone else's. And so I asked that question, and the reason I would love some sort of solution to this, because the response that I got was shock, right? Like, how dare someone mention empath in this public school setting, I guess, right? And then 2, the counselor who was there, who was a certified counselor, basically said, oh, well, I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty, or I don't have the right authority to comment on that, right? Or to even weigh in on that. And so I sat there as a parent going, so there's this situation, which is the reality of most kids. Most of them are empath. Most of them have incredible abilities that we're not able to, foresee even what they're happening. And 2, the school system is not at liberty to comment on that, right? And so I found myself as a parent at a complete loss going, wait, what? There should be a solution. Like, I know her truth, and I know how it is to have someone energy to come on to you, right? But then here's the school system. Now, granted, I'm in Oldham County, so I know Waldorf might have a solution for this, but Oldham County Schools does not. And so that is my wish forward, is we have to start thinking outside the box of normal circumstance, And
even I just was recently reading about, there was a little meme that talked about how we, a lot of the work we do with children on the so-called autistic spectrum, is about trying to help those children learn how to accommodate to whatever environments they're in. And this meme talked about how we have to start teaching other children and adults, about how do I gain the capacity, to relate and feel, into where the people so-called on the autistic spectrum are coming from. That should be the ideal that we need to develop as well as nurture the development of others. And so one approach to even addressing that issue is asking, are we asking that question? So yes, we have a child in our classroom who seems to be disruptive or seems to can't find the flow. What is the appropriate response for all of us do that? You know, not just what do we do to get that child under control, you know, and that is a question that lives out there. But you know, again, I had a child in my class in Detroit, and I realized this child was an old soul. I mean, and a lot of the things the child was doing to me says, who are you trying to teach me? It was like, it's what I felt from the child. And I was like, okay, I bow, but this is the role we're in right now, man. So let's see how we can do the best with this. Because I mean, she would just look at you and it'd be like, okay, I get it, you know? But we still got to figure out a way to work this new role we in here now, you know? And that's got to be a part of it, you know?
Tanya, I really appreciate the question, and that's exactly what the Soul-Centric City is trying to cultivate. I've met with the JCPS Social and Emotional Learning folks, and I'm going to have them on in May to talk about what the curriculum is for social and emotional learning, because I think we've got to find the advocacy places to bring in these kinds of awareness that you're talking about, like spiritual awareness or soulful awareness or intuition or other forms of cognitive processing, to make room for all of these other ways that children show up that our current system doesn't have a curriculum for. They don't even know how to nurture it, you know. In some ways, they're even trying to box it out. So then anything doesn't fit in the normative box, we don't have any way to see, and we want them to get in that box because that makes it easier in some ways for us to and so I think the advocacy around what you're talking about is really important. How do we advocate for a more of a social, emotional, soulful, spiritual curriculum? And the fear of getting into, you know, spiritual or religious ideologies is one of the things that we haven't been able to nuance very well. Like when we're talking about a religious, are we talking about, you know, an ideology of the religion, or are we talking about the spiritual religious life of children, and what, you know, how do we nurture that as well?
There is one last aspect of this that I want to get in, which is we covered the physical appearance, physical presence, and a little bit about the life presence or vitality of the child. But the last thing you want to be able to observe is the interest which is present. We can observe how a child expresses their interest in the child. And I am putting the link to my slide presentation in the chat. Maybe people can copy that so you can go back to this, because and so I'm gonna go and talk about how you observe the interest the child is showing in the world, and how you can articulate that, so that the last thing we need to address here. Let me go. Okay, where's that now?
Japa, while you're doing that, can you also share, you said there are the three things that you're looking at: physicality, energy,
Vitality, the movement, vitality, physicality, vitality, and interest.
okay.
You can also look at intention, but that comes with an older people. So there's really four things, but okay, are we back to that? Yeah. So I'm going to go back to this form, and I'm going to go to the interest. So of course, trying to observe the interest that the child shows in the world starts with whatever activities they like to do. And of course, this teacher who filled this out was giving me that the child, you know, was in the building, knocking things down, gross motor play, gave me the list of ways, playing doctor, less caretaking and more surgical. And so, using carrying sticks or a weapon of some sort. And so here's another child finding special things on the ground, making small things with clay, being an animal. In the picture, we saw the two children, one building blocks and making the tower, whereas the other child was um, making the colorful blocks and creating more balanced structures. We want to look at how the child expresses their interest in the world. And one question is what's the nature of their social engagement when they're involved in these things? And so, like in our particular case, we can call the social engagement was proximal but independent, with the acknowledgement of the peer's presence. Um, Children can be extroverted and combative. So you look at the character of the social, look at the activities that children like to engage in. You look at the character of the social engagement. And again, these are ways of picking up on the child's energetic being, moods. And so this particular teacher says this child's mood has been hard to read. He may appear calm and agreeable, but respond with a defiant, angry, or a defensive mood. But he may also be cooperative and gentle. The child that's in our video, one teacher said it was anticipating, the mood was anticipating, joyous, focused, undistracted, satisfied. Here's a child who is mostly happy but needy. And here is one important thing to look at. Look at how there's impact on social engagement and our moods over an activity that a child is participating in. For instance, in our video, we had this child who was building this tower, but what was the impact of her building a tower? That it actually invited the engagement and interest of others. Where some people, the impact of their activities is always to exclude, to gain more social distance, and they protect what they're building from others and don't involve. So the impact on social engagement on our moods that the activities the child likes bring about is a very important way to look at the individuality of the child. Like in this case, sometimes the child's engaged in an activity may lead to bounciness, fiery, sensitivity. In this particular case, the activity attracted the interest of peers, and that interest heightened the child's joy. So I think that gives an overall picture. And so I'll just come back to the screen and we can just kind of wrap up and talk about things overall. And I want to say that where we want to go from this, in some way, it'll be good if you can do an observation, take that form and do an observation, because what's important after you've done this observation is really cultivating, in a sense, what you think you already have a little bit of, Tanya, this feeling perception. In response to this, you can get a feeling perception. And out of this feeling perception, you can get these informative images. And these informative images can be used to then bring you to some knowledge of the individuality of what's been expressed in the child. And that's what we want to work on the next time we have a session. Any follow-up or ending questions or anything?
So some homework you're giving Japa is for them to go on, and I've pasted on the Facebook chat as well the resource, your slide presentation, and they can get to that form.
They can get to that form in that slide presentation, and
Yeah.
that will go through this detailed way. You can try to observe the presence of the child in its three aspects: physical, the vitality of the child, and the interest of the child in the world, as a way of getting to the energetic presence of the child. and then being able to take that energetic presence or as a feeling perception and develop. Imagery is important because it holds knowledge in a different way than we hold it otherwise. And so moving out of that feeling perception to an imagery element can be significant in terms of what you really can come to understand about what's going on.
Thanks, Japa. Are there any questions from anybody that's on the Zoom follow-up, or what's been one of the checkout questions that we often do is what's been interesting to you, like what's kind of been spurred in your thinking and your imagination as Japa's been sharing. Is there anything you want to echo or bring into the conversation that's showing up in you?
Well, to Japa's point is, it would be interesting to practice taking the energetic and narrowing down to physical expression, right? Going the opposite direction. So I think I would find that difficult, like taking that form and going from the top down and being able to, I don't know. So it would be interesting for me to fill out that form and not go the opposite direction.
Yeah, I know. I definitely have. I always pick up on that level first too, so I understand where you're coming from.
And I think it'll be really interesting to write it down. I could go through and probably list out qualities in my boys of these things, but just like their breathy, or their voice, breathy, dry, wet, thinking about how it changes depending on what they're talking about. I think really writing that down would reveal things to me that I'm not necessarily seeing. So I think that'll be helpful.
Yeah, that's one thing in that little initial statement I make, I say the goal is to practice loving and careful observation and articulation, because that's one of the things that's important as well. As someone who's in a professional role, it's definitely important. It's not so necessarily important if you're a parent, because just doing that can heighten your relationship with your child. But, I'm someone who works with other teachers, and I have to work with how they can actually bring this to something that they can articulate and have as a source of continued engagement, and so that's practice. And it's like you, Tanya. I'm what they call a Saturn personality, the opposite of what's called a Moon personality. Moon personalities are people who are into details and things like that. And Saturn's the opposite, big picture people. But I have made it one of my life practices is to move from the Moon, move from Saturn to Moon, to be able to do that, to be able to provide more service in the world by virtue of being able to do that. Because as a Saturn personality, it's like, it becomes pretty useless.
Well, but it's
not useless for me and for whoever I'm relating to in the moment. I do a lot of listening in groups, that all that stuff is helpful, but I find I can definitely impact things in a different way if I do that struggle of bringing things into that Moon realm, and it's not easy.
No, not easy.
There's a couple of other resources. The James Hillman's The Soul's Code kind of comes out of this paradigm as well. And also we'll get into, I think, later in other weeks, how do we bring forth these images in a way that then can be guiding for us? So what are the expressive therapies or the expressive technologies? Once we have these intuitions, what are the creative means we can bring them forward? Like color or movement or music, or there are all these kind of different ways in which we can express this deeper soul's code. And James Hillman's book, The Soul's Code, is really on this paradigm that our job is to see everybody's unique soul code, and not try to whittle it away into their functionality. Functionality is important, but how do we create spaces where the unique character and soul of every person can be honored and seen and be held and nurtured? That really is the vision of the soul-centric city, and I would recommend the Soul's Code by James Hillman, which is actually pushing against a lot of the medical, even the psychological world that is bought into functionality as the primary goal of school or even mental health, is to get you to function in a societal context better. And James Hillman says, no, a lot of times, functionality is only part of the game. That wholeness and the fullness expression of our lives is really the goal. And functionality is a part of that, but it's not the goal. Are there any kind of closing thoughts, Japa? Anything you would want to add at closing, or anybody else on Zoom would want to add to the conversation?
I guess I'll just reiterate what I started off with in terms of my initial statements about these two elements. This loving, what does it mean to be loving? What does it mean to be careful? And for me, what it means to be loving is recognizing that that when we look at the presence of a child, that we're seeing this activity of spirit in its effort to create this person prepared to fulfill a destiny. And if we're not bringing that to the observation, then you can't. Then it doesn't embrace the being that's before us. It's not loving. And then again, if we're in a way, to Tanya's point a little bit, if we're doing observations, and if those observations are in any way gonna lift us to an energetic understanding of the child, we have to strive to make sure they're just not placing the child in a particular demographic, but that we've did the work to nuance these a little bit. Because without that nuance, the individuality of the child is not going to be revealed. So there's a little bit of work that needs to be done in these observations to say something that is not just the child has black hair, or the child has brown skin or blue eyes. You have to look into that nuanced picture presence that's coming at you, if it's going to be at all valuable to move to the next point, because otherwise you will be stuck in just, oh, this is a black child, this is a girl, this is a boy, and you won't go anywhere. You won't be able to develop any imagery.
Japa, can you give us a brief the next 2 weeks what we'll be doing?
Yeah, so next week we're going to be cultivating feeling perception. There's a particular process by which you can, once you've done this, sometimes it'll rise for you right away. You do the observation and it floats, the imagery floats up. But if it doesn't float up, there are ways you can cultivate the feeling perception. And there's using meditation and using art as ways of cultivating the feeling perception, out of which the imagery can then emerge. And so we'll work with that and imagery next week. So how do we cultivate the feeling perception, get to the imagery? And then in the third week, how do we look at that imagery for how it informs us about the wholeness of the child? What analytic tools can help with that? And most of these analytic tools that we'll be using will be what can make sense. I have Steiner's image of the human being, and it can get pretty esoteric, but I brought some that I think are very much relatable, some analytic tools. When you get to the analytic tool part, in some ways your own it's dangerous place to go, because you can get so reductionist so quick. Analytic tools get reductionist. So you have to have analytic tools that can keep the whole thing whole, that can see the whole child and not do that. And so I will talk about some analytic tools that lend themselves to that wholeness and not reduce the child and reduce whatever you come up with.
Beautiful. Japa, thank you so much for giving your time and your wisdom to our city and to cultivating a soul-centric city and individuals. I appreciate your wisdom and your time. For those that have been joining us on Facebook, thanks for joining. We'll continue this the next 2 Thursdays at noon, and you can also find the download on Interfaith Paths to Peace webpage. Thank you all for joining, and
Thank you all.
Have a blessed day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.